Picture the moment you fell, not the moment you decided to. Nobody decides. The moment it happened, when something in you shifted and you found yourself thinking about this person at odd hours, building a version of them in your head that felt more real than most things in your actual life. Now ask yourself something. Were you in love with who they were or who they could become? Because for a lot of people, if they're honest, the answer is the second one. They were in love with a version of the person that hadn't quite arrived yet. A version they could see in the good moments, the moments of warmth, of depth, of something that felt like a glimpse of something extraordinary. And they were waiting, patiently, sometimes for years, for the rest of the person to catch up. This is one of the most common and most quietly devastating patterns in romantic life. And almost nobody sees it while it's happening. Here's what makes it so hard to recognize. The glimpses are real. That's the thing. The person you fell for did show you something. There were moments, maybe a conversation that went somewhere unexpected, a kindness that caught you off guard, a quality that surfaced briefly and made you think, there it is. That's who this person really is. The problem is that those moments weren't who the person really was in the sense of what they consistently were. They were who the person was capable of being, under the right conditions, on the right day. Potential and consistency are completely different things. Potential is what's possible. Consistency is what actually shows up in ordinary circumstances under normal pressure, when there's no particular reason to perform. Most people who fall in love with potential have, without realizing it, built their entire emotional investment on the possibility rather than the pattern, on the glimpses rather than the baseline. Psychologists have a name for what drives this. It's called intermittent reinforcement, and it was originally discovered in research on animal behavior, specifically in studies of what kinds of reward schedules produced the most persistent responses. The finding was counterintuitive. It wasn't consistent reward that produced the most persistent behavior. It was inconsistent reward, unpredictable, occasionally delivered, never quite certain, a slot machine rather than a vending machine. The vending machine is satisfying. You put in the coin, you get the result, you move on. There's no compulsion. There's nothing to chase. The slot machine is different. You pull the lever. You don't know what's coming. Sometimes nothing happens. Sometimes everything does. And something in the brain catches fire in a way it never does with the vending machine. The unpredictability itself becomes the engine. When a person is inconsistent, sometimes warm, sometimes distant, sometimes extraordinary, sometimes disappointing, they become the slot machine, not through any intention, just through the structure of the dynamic. And the part of your brain that gets activated isn't the part that makes good decisions. It's the part that drives pursuit. What you're chasing in those moments isn't actually the person. It's the feeling you got during the good moments. And more specifically, you're chasing the return of a feeling that has become associated with this specific person in a context where they keep not quite producing it, which makes the wanting more urgent rather than less. The relationship philosopher Alain de Botton puts it directly, we don't fall in love with people. We fall in love with the version of ourselves we become around them, or the version of them we construct in the absence of enough evidence. Most relationships that are organized around potential involve a significant amount of imagination. The person you're in love with is partly the human in front of you and partly a projection. What they could be, what you could be with them, what the relationship could become when the obstacles are cleared. The projection is what you're protecting. Every time something goes wrong, you're not primarily disappointed by the actual event. You're protecting the gap between the projection and reality from having to close. This pattern runs in places most people never look. If it's reaching you, subscribe. This is what we do here. Here's where the history comes in, because this rarely starts with the current relationship. Murray Bowen, the family systems theorist, spent decades tracing how emotional patterns transfer across generations. What he found is that the templates we use for love, what feels like love, what intensity love is supposed to have, what uncertainty and longing feel like from the inside, are not developed as adults. They're inherited, mostly unconsciously, from the earliest relationships we ever had. For people who grew up with inconsistent caregivers, parents who were sometimes deeply warm and sometimes unavailable, whose love felt real but unpredictable, the nervous system learned something specific. Love feels like this. Love has this texture. Love involves this particular oscillation between being reached and not being reached. As adults, when they encounter that same oscillation in a romantic relationship, it registers as familiar. And familiar, in the body's emotional vocabulary, tends to register as right. Someone who provides consistent, calm, genuinely available love can feel, to someone with this history, almost boring. Not because they're actually boring, because their emotional signature doesn't match the template. The person who produces the familiar uncertainty, the familiar intensity, the familiar working for the warmth, they feel like the real thing, even when the evidence suggests they're not. There's something specific that happens to the perception of evidence when you're in love with potential. It goes through a filter. Good moments get weighted more heavily than they warrant. They get labeled, "This is who they really are." The difficult moments, the inconsistencies, the genuine patterns of behavior that tell you something important about who this person actually is, those get relabeled. That's just circumstance. That's not really them. They're going through something. They're not like this usually. When things are different, they'll be different. What you end up with is a dynamic with two different people running simultaneously, the actual person and the future person they're going to become once conditions improve, and you've made your peace with the actual person as a temporary inconvenience, a holding pattern until the real version arrives. The philosopher Stendhal described this in 1822 in a book called On Love, using an image of crystallization, the way a bare branch thrown into salt-laden water gradually accumulates crystals until it looks like something glittering and extraordinary. He was describing what the mind does to someone it's in love with. It deposits beauty and possibility onto them, layer by layer, until the original object barely resembles what's underneath the crystallization. You stop seeing the person. You see what you've built on top of them. Here's the cost, and it's worth being precise about it. Years. That's the cost. Years spent in a dynamic that's organized around a future that may not arrive. Years of emotional energy poured into a relationship with a person who hasn't fully shown up yet, waiting for the circumstances that will finally allow them to. The opportunity cost of this is hard to calculate because it's invisible. It's not the pain of the relationship. There's real connection in these relationships, real feeling, real moments of what love looks and feels like. It's the parallel life that wasn't lived, the available person you didn't pursue because you were taken, the development of yourself that happens when you're in a relationship that actually meets you, rather than a relationship you're endlessly working to be met in. And then, at some point, the relationship ends through your choice or theirs, and you're left with the grief of losing both the person and the potential. The grief of what was real and the grief of what was never going to be. The second kind of grief takes longer because you're not grieving what you had. You're grieving what you were certain was coming. Here's the question that reveals whether this pattern is operating. Ask yourself, how much of my investment in this relationship is based on what they've actually shown me consistently over time? Not the moments, not the potential, not the when things are better. The actual, observed, repeated pattern of who this person is in ordinary life. For many people in relationships organized around potential, this question is difficult to answer because the honest answer would require admitting that the evidence for who the person actually is doesn't quite support the level of investment. The clinical psychologist Harriet Lerner describes this as the difference between loving someone and loving your idea of them. Both feel identical from the inside, But one is a relationship with someone real. The other is a relationship with your own projection, conducted in the presence of someone who has provided the initial inspiration. There's a specific version of this that happens with people who are in the process of change. Someone who is working on themselves, in therapy maybe, getting sober, rebuilding after a difficult period. There's something real and admirable about someone doing this work, and it's not wrong to see it and to be moved by it. The difficulty is when the relationship gets structured around the person they're becoming rather than the person they currently are. Because becoming is not having become. The work of change is genuine. The change itself hasn't arrived yet. And a relationship built around who someone is going to be once they've completed their transformation is not quite a relationship with them. It's an investment in your faith in their trajectory. Sometimes the trajectory completes and the person you hoped for is the person who appears. And sometimes the trajectory plateaus or reverses or never quite arrives at where you both thought it was heading. And the connection that was organized around the destination has no particular way to handle that. Here's what it looks like when the pattern breaks. Not dramatically, rarely dramatically, usually quietly after a long time. You stop arguing for who they could be and start seeing who they are. Not with contempt or disappointment, but with a kind of clarity. This is who this person is, not a damaged version of someone better. They exist exactly as they are right now. And from that clarity, a genuine choice becomes available for the first time. Not whether to stay while you're waiting for the better version to arrive, but whether you want to be with this actual person as they actually are, if this is as good as it gets. For some people, that question, answered honestly, produces a yes. Seen clearly is someone they want to be with. The love adjusts to fit who's actually there. For others, the honest answer is harder, but either way, it's a real answer, based on real information, which is something the years of loving the potential never quite produced. The practical question for anyone who recognizes this pattern is how you tell the difference between seeing genuine potential worth believing in and confusing imagination for reality. The clearest signal is time, not weeks, not the early months when everyone shows their best version, but consistent behavior across varied conditions over a long enough stretch that what you're seeing is the actual pattern rather than the performance. The question to ask is not, what is this person capable of on their best day? It's, who is this person on the ordinary days, when nothing particular is at stake, when there's no specific reason to perform, when they're just living? The ordinary days are the real data. The best days are lovely, but they're not representative. What the pattern looks like across 100 ordinary days is who you're actually with. And who you're actually with is the only person you can actually love. There's something specific that happens in the body during intermittent reinforcement that's worth understanding, because it explains why this feels like love even when it isn't working. When something you want is delivered unpredictably, the dopamine system in the brain doesn't just respond to the reward itself. It responds to the anticipation of the reward, the uncertainty of whether the reward is coming, and the relief of finally receiving it after the uncertainty. What this produces is a continuous low-grade preoccupation. The mind orbits around the person. Between the good moments, it's calculating. What are they thinking? What does that text mean? Are things getting better? Is this the shift I've been waiting for? The mental space consumed is enormous, and it's been mistaken for love so consistently across so many generations that most people have no reference point for what an alternative might feel like. This is love, they think, this intensity, this preoccupation, this feeling that nothing quite matters as much as this person, and this question of whether things are going to finally arrive where they should be. What they're describing is the brain in pursuit mode, which feels almost identical to love, which is exactly the problem. A relationship that provides consistent warmth and clear mutual investment tends to feel, to people who've spent years in the intermittent reinforcement dynamic, almost flat by comparison. Not because it is, because the absence of the chase removes the neurological spike that had been mistaken for depth. Here's a specific question worth sitting with. When the person you're in love with behaves in a way that disappoints you, when they're unavailable or inconsistent or fail to show up in a way that mattered, what is your primary response? For most people in this pattern, the answer is not. I should look at this as information about who this person is. The answer is, how do I make sense of this in a way that allows me to maintain my investment? The explanation machine starts running. External factors, stress, history they're working through, the fact that they were different last Tuesday, the glimpse that appeared last month that proved this version isn't who they really are. What you're doing, without realizing it, is protecting the projection. The actual data is trying to update the image, and the image is resisting the update. This is one of the clearest signals that you're in love with potential rather than with who's actually there. When inconvenient evidence consistently gets explained away rather than considered, you're not in a relationship with reality. You're maintaining a story about it. There's something the writer and philosopher Simone de Beauvoir wrote about love that cuts directly to the center of this. She described a specific failure in romantic love she observed, the way people tried to make another person into the guarantee of their own meaning and validity. To find in the beloved the certainty that they themselves are significant. To outsource the question of one's own worth to whether this particular person chooses them, wants them, becomes the person they hoped they'd be. She called this a bad faith relationship with freedom. Not because love was wrong, but because when love becomes about securing something in yourself through the behavior of another person, you've given up something essential. You've made your inner stability dependent on someone else's inconsistency, which means you're perpetually at risk, perpetually measuring, perpetually waiting for the signal that will tell you whether you're okay. People in love with potential are often, underneath the romantic story, doing exactly this. They need the person to become who they're capable of being because that becoming would confirm something the waiting person needs confirmed, that they chose well, that they can see what others can't, that their love was powerful enough to produce the transformation. The relationship is doing psychological work that the relationship was never designed to do. There's a version of this that shows up specifically with creative people, artists, writers, musicians, anyone who operates in the realm of vision and possibility often carry this to an extreme. They see what could be, what almost is, what the raw material suggests. This is part of what makes them good at what they do. They see potential in everything, and they can bring that same capacity into love, where it's considerably more dangerous. They see what this person could write, what this person's mind could become, the work that might emerge from them if the blocks cleared, the life they might build if the fear resolved. And they fall in love, not with who the person is, but with who the person might become as an artist, a thinker, a human being fully inhabiting their own gifts. The frustration that follows when the potential keeps not arriving, when the blocks don't clear, when the fear doesn't resolve, has a specific quality. It's not just romantic disappointment. It's the disappointment of a collaborator who believed in a project that never launched. The person got loved for their unrealized work, which means they were never quite seen for who they actually were without the work. Here's something that sounds harsh but tends to land as a relief when people actually sit with it. You cannot love someone into becoming who they could be. Love is many things. It's not that. It doesn't have that mechanism. The idea that the depth of your feeling will produce the transformation you're waiting for is one of the more durable romantic myths, and it has left an enormous number of people staying far too long in situations they should have left far earlier. What you can do is see someone clearly, be honest about what you see, decide whether what's actually there is what you want, and then let the rest of the growth, the potential, the transformation, the becoming, be something they do for themselves in their own time, with or without you. This doesn't require being cold about it. It doesn't require abandoning hope for people you care about. It just requires moving the locus of your emotional investment from who they might become to who they actually are. Because who exists right now is the only one you can be in a relationship with. The moment the pattern starts to break usually isn't dramatic, it's quiet. It comes after one specific kind of conversation, the one where you find yourself explaining to someone outside the relationship why this person is actually great. And you hear yourself saying the word potential repeatedly, and something in you registers what that means. Or it comes in the middle of another cycle of the same argument, with the same gestures toward change that don't quite stick, and you feel something in you go very still rather than reactive. And you realize that the stillness is not acceptance of the situation. It's the quiet exhaustion of someone who has just stopped being surprised. The pattern breaks not when you stop loving them, but when you stop waiting. When the investment in the future version finally releases, what comes into focus is the present version, and the question becomes immediate and real in a way it never was before. Is this who I want to be with? Not who I'm waiting for. Who is here? That question, honestly answered, is the only one that was ever worth asking. There's a practical dimension to all of this that's worth being explicit about. The default is to wait for the situation to clarify itself, for something to happen that makes the decision obvious, for the potential to finally arrive or finally fail in a way so undeniable that no explanation can cover it. But situations organized around potential almost never clarify themselves. They have a remarkable capacity for ambiguity. There's always enough good to justify staying, always enough bad to justify concern, always another cycle beginning that might be different from the last one. The wait can go on indefinitely, years, decades, and the waiting itself becomes part of the investment. The longer you've stayed, the more it costs to leave, the more it would mean about the time already spent if you admitted the direction this was going. This is what economists call the sunk cost fallacy applied to love. You don't keep investing in a stock because it's going to perform well. You keep investing because you've already put so much in that selling would mean acknowledging the loss. And the acknowledgement is unbearable, so you defer it by staying. The practical move, which is simple and brutal and not easy at all, is to pretend the past investment doesn't exist. To ask, if you met this exact situation today, this particular dynamic, this actual pattern, would you choose to enter it? Not given everything you've already built, not with all the history that's real and worth honoring, not accounting for the glimpses of who they could be. This exact situation today with no prior attachment. Would you choose this? The answer is usually clear very quickly. And it tends to be different from the answer that emerges when you're reasoning from inside the accumulated investment. Here's something that takes time to understand, but that changes the entire way you read this pattern once you do. Loving someone's potential is not really about them, it's about you. Specifically, it's about the story you've written for yourself about the kind of person you are. Someone who sees what others don't, who believes in people, who has the patience and capacity to love someone at a level deep enough to draw out their best self. That's a story about generosity, about depth, about having a quality of love that ordinary people don't quite have. And it might be entirely true. The capacity to see what someone could be is real. The love is real. What's also real is that organizing a relationship around a story about your own exceptional generosity is partly a way of avoiding the more ordinary and more difficult question. Is this what I want? Not as a demonstration of my capacity for love, as my actual life. The gap between I love them at a level they don't yet understand and I choose to be with who they are right now is not a gap between deep love and shallow love. It's the gap between a story about yourself and an honest assessment of the situation. The honest assessment is harder to face. It doesn't say anything as meaningful about who you are, but it's the one your actual life gets lived inside of. One last thing, because it changes how this whole pattern looks in the rear view. The people who loved you for your potential, rather than for who you were, you felt that, even if you couldn't name it. The sense that you were a project rather than a person. That the warmth was conditional on something you hadn't yet delivered. That the love required you to keep becoming rather than allowing you to just be. That experience taught you something about what it feels like to be loved that way. It doesn't feel like being seen. It feels like being auditioned. Bringing that understanding into how you love other people, asking yourself whether you're loving who's there or who you're expecting them to become, is not just useful for the other person. It's useful for you. Because you know, from the inside, what it costs to be loved primarily for what you could be. You know what it feels like to be loved for what you actually are instead. Hold that as the standard. There's something about how this pattern ends, when it does end, that people rarely talk about, because it doesn't fit the narrative of a clean resolution. When you finally let go of loving someone's potential and see them as they actually are, there's often a strange kind of grief that arrives. Not the grief of losing them, the grief of realizing you were never quite with them in the first place. You were with a version of them that lived partly in your imagination. And all the time you spent with them, the real time, the actual hours and years, was partly spent somewhere else. In the future, that was going to happen. In the person they were going to become. That future doesn't exist anymore. It may never have existed. And mourning something that was never real is its own particular kind of loss. Harder to explain to people who ask what you're sad about. Harder to locate. Harder to finish. What's on the other side of it, though, is something worth knowing. Clarity about what you're looking for. Not potential, not possibility, not the person in their best moments. The ordinary days, the consistent pattern, the willingness to be with what's there rather than what's implied. And the discovery, which takes most people genuinely by surprise, that a love built on that kind of clear seeing can go deeper than anything organized around a projection ever could. Because you're in a relationship with a real person, with all their ordinariness and limitation and consistency and actual particular self. Not a draft version, not a promise, the finished thing, which is the only version that was ever going to love you back. There's one more thing worth saying, because this pattern doesn't only appear in romantic love, it shows up in friendships, in family relationships, in how people relate to mentors and heroes, and anyone whose approval or transformation matters to them. The friend you keep waiting to really show up. The parent whose depth of feeling you keep believing in despite the evidence. The mentor whose judgment about your work you're still trying to earn, decades later, from someone who may simply not have what you need them to have. In each of these, the structure is the same. You've decided what this person is capable of. You've made that capacity the basis of your investment. And the gap between the capacity you've attributed to them and what they're actually providing continues to quietly cost you. Time, energy, the version of that relationship that could exist if you were in it with who's actually there. The skill that breaks all of these patterns is the same one. It's called accurate perception, not cynicism, not the decision to expect nothing so you can't be disappointed, just seeing what's there. Building your investment from what's consistently available rather than from what's theoretically possible. This sounds simple. It requires practice, because the imagination is faster than the evidence, and hope is more comfortable than clarity, and the story about potential is always more flattering. To them, to you, to what love says about you, than the story about what's actually showing up. But accurate perception, developed gradually in relationship after relationship, is what produces something the potential chasing never does. Actual intimacy with actual people as they actually are. Which is the only kind there is. For the comments, when you look at the significant relationship in your life, past or present, how much of what you loved was what was consistently there, and how much was what you were waiting for? Name it honestly, even to yourself. Especially to yourself. I'll see you in the next one.